A lot of my work, I think, starts with an image, right? And as time went on, the image also started to, I also started to understand the communicative power of material. Each work is telling the story. It may not always be sensible, which, which I'm starting to have less of a problem with. I think there's always been a kind of a poetry in the work, and which fuels certain elements of the work. But I don't know. I think like now I'm starting to hopefully I don't know, just let materials kind of guide me more. So the title of the show is "The End of My Beginning," and it stems from a piece that I did around 2005, 2006, which is the scene of a blizzard, like a snow scene, but the snow has been replaced by black hair, by African American hair. And it's about the size of a train model, like model set. And so you have this blizzard, which is kind of subsumed this two-story kind of suburban home, and there are people who are in the blizzard trying to find their way. So that's where the title comes from. To me, it has come to signify kind of like the movement from one stage in my development to another stage. Since this is my first solo exhibition of this nature, it's kind of like, it will be interesting to see what happens after it. So I think this does kind of set a mark, or like a shift in what is to come. I'm still like, I guess, getting used to all of these works being together, because when I made them, that wasn't exactly my intention, or I wasn't like forecasting that, right? And so, although you hope, you would have an exhibition like this, they're more kind of like individual experiences. So while the exhibition is up, I do plan to spend a lot of time here, just to see, I guess, to see what are the kind of subtle and maybe even subconscious connections. Like there's an aspect of my work that I do leave on the back seat, and that's like the formal side of my practice. And so I think these works being together in this space will help me to kind of figure that out. My undergraduate is in photography, right? Photography and digital media. However, I didn't use a camera after like the first year. So that was at a time when people were just starting to be more open to digital photography and scanning, and like that was also considered a photographic practice. So that's what I ended up doing. And really, like that's what is at work in the objects that I make. I don't really think about like a sculptural field and people necessarily walking around the world. I don't necessarily think about it like that. I do think more about the image and the I guess like the collisions of materials, right? And what that's communicating. I am realizing the importance of photography in my work to even generate sculptures. So like the Lights from the Garden, there's a chair which is in a very common photo of the stage of the Audubon Ballroom where Malcolm X was assassinated, where it's one of those kind of bent wood bar chairs that's kind of laid on its side on the floor. And however, there's no other body, there's no other, you don't see his body in the image, you just see that chair and a painted background. And so when I would see that image, it started to stand in for the assassination, for him. And so for me, I think like just that's how, I'm connecting that photograph with this actual object, and then, for me, those objects are communicating a certain history, that's really kind of expansive, right? And so yeah, I would say like that's how the sculptures come to be. Like the Ballad for a Child is really based off of a photograph which I saw of Eldridge Cleaver, who later in his life started making these planters, these mosaic planters out of river rocks, right? And it's odd. I mean, to think of which he was selling like in Florida or somewhere in different kind of like markets, right? I mean, just to think about this man who had this really incredible history ending up in that way. So it became like a touchstone to talk about, for me to think about the trajectory of his life, right? But I did add the philodendrons made out of leather and that kind of thing. Like that's what I added in that sculpture. So yeah, a lot of the objects come from photographs. Not all of them, but a lot of them do come from photos. This is something that Leroy Jones writes about, is that in the history of Black people in America is in many ways recorded through music, right? And so I think what I'm doing I mean, I was brought up in a musical family, and I'm not a musician, but you know, I have like a very personal association with music, and kind of like my mom was a gospel singer, my uncle is a professional gospel musician, but also like how I used music as a teen to kind of build my identity, right? So it's always been of interest to me. And then as I started to dig deeper, I would read books like Blues People by Leroy Jones, to where or Mary Baraka, where he talks about the role and function of Black music in America, you know? And so for me, it's a touchstone because it allows me to talk about politics, but also to talk about aesthetics, to talk about, you know, like sociality, like how do you want to say, like the intermingling of cultures in America, you know, and then it also kind of, at least with the Pride records, it allows me to participate in another way to create things that I maybe have not seen. So the Pride series is a collection of records, and it's record covers. So I haven't produced any sound from it, right? So a lot of the groups within the Pride series are entirely fictional, but relate to different moments in history, primarily within the late 60s, early 70s. Now there's also a related story about the record label, is that it is successful in reaching the market that it wanted to connect with, and because of that, it becomes also a part of the FBI kind of activities, right? So, you know, all of these things are kind of linked back and linked together in a way, but they come under the surveillance of the FBI, and eventually it becomes hard for Pride to make and distribute its music, and they have to be bought out by a larger company, and by being bought out by a larger company has to change its direction musically. So it goes from the very political kind of like political music to being more about dance and, you know, and the body and entertainment. So it's 20 records in the Pride series. And each of there are 3 sculptures. Each of them refer to a different form of record store display. So the largest one is Jerry White's record shop, which is this, a picture I saw of a record shop in South Central LA, which had like these records like all on the facade of the store, right? And when I saw that, I immediately wanted to do something with it. So I've taken the Pride records and kind of put them in others and put them in that, organize them in that fashion. There's another one which is called Pride Findings Tokyo, which is about black music as a commodity, right? As an international commodity. And it's kind of like a fictional display that would be in the Tokyo record shop, and it also has Japanese descriptions and pricing labels on it. And the last one, which is so far untitled, but it's the third and the last series in the Pride, Sculpture in the Pride series, is based off of a political convention that was held in Gary, Indiana in 1971, in which a group of black activists were trying to prevent black voters from being taken advantage of by the Republican and the Democratic Party, and so they tried to meet to get to like a mass, just to increase their influence and kind of. However, within that the conference, there was a vendor section, and the last one is based off of an image I saw in the documentary of the vendor section, and where you had a series of books and records also at the top. Started working with those, with documents from the FBI's, it's Freedom of Information Act Reading Room, which is an online archive of a PDF of different, documents from just surveil figures throughout American history. I started with different political activists. There's not a lot of Martin Luther King stuff there, so I wasn't dealing with a lot of Martin Luther King, but primarily the Black Panther Party, Malcolm X, Tupac Shakur, like those kind of figures. And as time went on, and they started to load more documents onto the website, I shifted from these kind of political figures to artists, primarily writers, who are using their work, for these different social causes. So Richard Wright is on there, James Baldwin is there. There's a Marian Anderson file as well. So it starts to branch out into those types of figures. They originally started as these drawings, large-scale drawings, about the size of my body, that I was doing on the floor with graphite powder and stencils and brooms. So it's kind of in a two-part process. In making the stencil, I would either cut it out with an X-Acto knife or kind of file it out with a Dremel tool. Place that on the floor, sprinkle graphite powder on top, and then work it into the surface of the paper. As time went on, I started to shift the material from the graphite powder to textiles. Although the process of cutting the stencil was sometimes very laborious, like the actual making of them was fast. And so they almost seemed kind of ephemeral, like the drawing itself was, it seems like kind of almost ephemeral, right? Like it's like a sketch or something, because of how fast I could make them. However, with the textiles, starting out with like muslin and then going into denim, it was a two-part process in terms of breaking the textile down and then gluing them back together to make these shapes. And in doing that, because I wanted to, kind of touch upon the history of quilt making, right? But also kind of make these objects which I felt were like more commemorative in a way, or I think that's part of the shift in material. There are a couple of turning points, but I think maybe the one that's most significant is it's a 3-series work, or it's a series within the redacted documents called Culture Ops, and it's in 3 parts. And the first one is not here in this exhibition, but it's a larger, roughly 60 by 80 graphite drawing of different redactions that were taken out of different documents within Malcolm X's file. It's kind of a musical score. Like there were certain like alternatives kind of approaches to scoring music that come out of the 60s, late 60s. And so I was trying to put together one of those, one of those pieces and really pointing at kind of avant-garde kind of jazz practices of that time period. So the first one is in graphite. The next one is a little bit smaller. I think it's 30 by 40 inches, and it's in wax. So it's still the same kind of arrangement of shapes or redactions, but it's now in wax. And that was really, to me, about the hip hop movement, right? And kind of really like a certain part of the hip hop movement which was very politically conscious, but very short lived, right? And then the last one is in blue denim, and that was about the advent of recordings, of blues recordings, right? That were like in the early 20th century, right? So with each of these kind of periods, you know, black music and black creativity are used for entertainment purposes, for expressive purposes, but also for political ends, right? And so that's kind of what, you know, it took me a while to get to that this is something that didn't just happen in the 60s, but happened kind of from the beginning of recorded black music in this country. You know, that when you talk about like the spirituals, those were used by the abolitionists, right? If you talk about free jazz, that was used by, you know, kind of progressive entities within America and in Europe. And then when you talk about hip hop, you know, it was a very political moment, at least like the late 80s, early 90s. And that was my generation's, I think, attempt at kind of like a cultural renaissance, right? So for me to think about like how that affected me and my experience of living through that, and then also thinking about it being very short-lived, I think it's meaningful to me. So I would say like that's a series which is a turning point for me. I would say really with that series, none of it is stitched together. It's all glued together. And interestingly, like, just to say a little bit about the Jet Art Archive series, like I use, so there are two kind of different sizes within the exhibition, one which is a smaller piece, where the entire magazine is used, right? But it's layered. Right, so there are layers of paper behind the layer that you see, right? So that's one of the rules that I made for myself with that series. I always have to use the entire magazine. So also the back part also has. So if you would take it out the frame, there's a front and a back, and it's probably about 1/8 of an inch thick, right? Like okay, and so the larger piece is done the same way. However, it's made up of 3 different magazines from around the time of the LA Rebellion of 1991, 92, somewhere around there. And instead of it being layered, it's glued to itself, like the pieces are all glued to itself, so it creates this kind of textile kind of work. So I figured that out after during the BMW trip, where we went to this village where kente cloth is supposed to have originated, and saw how they made kente cloth, which is in like these like long strips, and then they sew them together, and like that's how, you know, I figured out how to increase the scale of the jet works. Yeah. But I would also say it is rhythmic in regards to the like formal aspects of the textile, because how I've created like a small kind of pattern or series, numerical series like that I use as I go through the magazine. Yeah. So again, that was like originally like this desire to connect to ancient Egypt, but also many of the papyrus works that I had seen were often fragments, right? Well, at least the ones that I was most like taken by, they were fragments, right? And so it seemed to me to be a good material to discuss, you know, with Eroding Witness. Like this is basically about the dissolution or the breakdown of historical memory, right? And particularly like within the Black community of kind of past kind of political ideals and values, right? And so when I got the material, I don't know, with that series, it's really, it was just kind of like a synergy, because I was already working with a laser cutter to start to make stencils for smaller drawings. And so I wanted to use the material and then just kind of make this connection between fragments and the stencils, and then fragments with the kind of papyrus pieces, right? Like, because they're, you know, the cutouts are also kind of like the breaking or eroding of the material itself. So that's, you know, that's how that was chosen, or how that series started. Performance in the body, I would say like, yeah, it's a mainstay in the work. I don't always perform, but like those, but it is thought of, and it starts with the drawings, right? The performance of these things, which are about the size, you know, the large scale drawings, which are about the size of my body, very physical. And then like the sculpture, the jacket sculptures, you know, are about the body as well. And again, like for me, like that's I really thought about that as at least in America, like a domain where Black culture has contributed a lot to it, right? And so thinking about that as a jump off point for the visual work, you know. Yeah. I guess like my first like experience of collaboration just comes out of working with a group of friends. I was part of the collaborative Odom and Jones and Associates. We all met at Texas Southern University, and we're really just friends, and eventually had an exhibition where we kind of just saw, I don't know, these commonalities between what we were doing, and it was kind of like, you know, this gelling also, or flow between the works, and we decided to do start working as a group together. So that was my first experience with collaboration. But then it starts to happen also in later on with different artists. The mural that you spoke of is a collaboration between a Third Ward sign painter named Walter Stansel, who has worked in the Third Ward area and outside, but primarily in the Third Ward area for like the last 40 years. So we've been doing things together since roughly 2014. And so this is probably the largest piece that we've done together. But yeah, we primarily do text works that utilize some icons, but mainly his hand lettering style, which is a really specific kind of alphabet that he does and nobody else you know, like since it's with his hand, he has a look that nobody else has. I still basically just make work about things that I'm interested in, right? And my work is still related to a desire to know more about America, more about, the African diaspora, more about myself. And I think like keeping that as my kind of my guidepost, like I feel like that's just been really generative for me. And so that's what I would say, is a way for people to continue to be active, for young artists to continue to be active, to find a place to make work from that's genuine, right, and that you kind of feel compelled to do, right. So, I would say that's what. Now, has it changed over time? It really, I guess, what has changed over time is, which is exciting, is like, the opportunity to share the work with more people and the kind of resources that I kind of have now that I didn't have earlier on, right? So hopefully, what I do in the studio will continue to expand and continue to build. I do hope I will get there because I do think like I make work from a particular place, right? I had a very particular upbringing here in Houston, and I think, yeah, that there are elements of that which can make a contribution, right? I mean, as long as I'm able to find, well, I think anybody's work can make a contribution as long as they find or try to find what's unique to them, right? So I think like that's what I'm hoping to do.